3 days. That was all the time they gave Ruby Mercer to prepare to become the wife of a man she had never met. She was a night shift nurse at a public hospital in Chicago. Her mother worked as a housekeeper for Harold Vaughn, a woman who had lost her voice to a stroke, living on her wages and on the medication her employers paid for. So when Mr. Vaughn called Ruby into the sitting room and told her she would be marrying in place of his daughter, then added that if she refused, her mother would lose her job, her room, and her medicine, Ruby understood at once that this was not an offer. "You're a nurse," he said. "You're the perfect choice." She said no. Then she looked toward the small room at the back of the house, where her mother was sitting, and she said yes. They made her memorize another woman's birthday, another woman's school, another woman's signature. On the day she signed the marriage papers, she wrote down a name that was not hers. The groom was not there. They told her he was unwell. It was not until the door at the end of the hallway opened that Ruby understood what unwell meant. Alessio Ferrante lay motionless on the bed. He had not opened his eyes in 2 years. All of Chicago knew his name, and for just as long, no one had dared say it out loud. Ruby stood there a long time. Then the nurse in her won out over the fear. She stepped forward, laid her fingers on his wrist, and counted his pulse. And as she had on every night shift for 7 years, she began to sing softly. She did not know he could hear her, and she certainly did not know that on the day he opened his eyes, the first words he spoke would turn that entire house upside down and send her running to find the truth about her own dead father. If Ruby's story touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And don't forget to subscribe. There are many more stories about quietly good people still waiting to be told. The man standing in the corner of the room didn't move. Ruby knew he'd been there from the moment she walked in, and she also knew he would remain there until she left. She didn't ask his name. She simply pulled a chair closer to the head of the bed, opened her bag, took out the worn notebook with frayed corners that she'd carried through 7 years in the profession, and began to write. Repositioning schedule, every 2 hours. Passive range of motion exercises, morning and evening. Check the skin over pressure points. Oral care. She wrote in the small, rapid handwriting of someone accustomed to taking notes in the middle of a shift, and when she finished, she looked up and stared directly at the man in the corner. "Are you planning to stand there all night?" "Yes, Mrs. Ferrante." She faltered slightly at the sound of that name being attached to her. "I need to know who I'm speaking to." "Cormac Doyle. I work for Mr. Ferrante. Mr. Ferrante is lying right here. I still work for him." Ruby didn't reply. She turned back to the man in the bed, pushed up his sleeve, placed 2 fingers against his wrist, and counted. She counted for a full minute, then wrote down the number. Afterward, she checked the medication chart hanging at the head of the bed. She read it once, then read it again, more slowly. "Who prescribed this?" "The family's private physician." "Then call the family's private physician for me. Right now." Cormac didn't move. "What do you want to tell him?" "I want to tell him that the dosage of this antispasmodic medication has remained unchanged for 2 years, even though the patient has lost nearly 15 kilograms. That means he's been receiving more than he needs for the past 2 years. It means the medication is keeping him far more deeply sedated than his condition alone would." For the first time that night, the man in the corner shifted his stance. "Are you certain?" "I'm not certain. The doctor is the one who'll make that decision. But I am certain no one has weighed him again in a 1.5 years, because this monitoring chart only records his weight through February of last year." She set the medication chart down. "Are you going to call? Or do I need to find the number myself?" Cormac stepped outside. Left alone, Ruby sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the man whom the documents called her husband. He was younger than she'd imagined. 2 years of lying still had taken a great deal from him, yet a thin scar running along the left side of his jaw remained untouched, and Ruby thought that scar must have a story she would never hear. The phone in her bag vibrated. It was a message from the head of her department. Her resignation had been approved, and they were asking whether she wanted them to keep her position open in case she changed her mind. Ruby read it twice. 7 years of night shifts. 7 years of entering the hospital at 8 o'clock in the evening and leaving at 8 o'clock in the morning, eating breakfast as though it were dinner, sleeping, while the entire city went to work. She typed back a single word of thanks, then raised a hand to her chest and removed the employee badge still pinned to her uniform. R. Mercer. Nurse. She looked at it for a moment, then slipped it into the inner pocket of her jacket, fastened the button, and didn't think about it again. When When Cormac returned, he said the doctor would come in the morning. He asked where you learned all that. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know. Ruby nodded. Where is my room? At the far end of the other hallway. Camilla had someone prepare it. Good. I'll get up every 2 hours to turn him. Tell the guards at the door not to be startled when they see me walking around at night. She picked up her bag and paused at the threshold. Mr. Doyle? Yes. You don't trust me. That's all right. But if you intend to stand there and watch, stand closer. So the next time I need someone to help lift him, you'll know where to support him. She walked away. Cormac remained in the room where no one had raised their voice in 2 years, staring at the medication chart hanging crookedly above the bed. Then he took out his phone and dialed a familiar number. He waited through 3 rings. She knows what she's doing, he said. But she isn't who we thought she was. By the 4th day, the room at the end of the hallway had settled into a rhythm of its own. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Ruby came in, drew the curtains halfway open, and raised the window about 4 inches. At 6:15, she bathed him, changed his shirt, and checked every area of skin she'd marked in her notebook. At 7, she bent and straightened the joints in his arms and legs, 10 times for each joint, counting aloud. At 9, she fed him through the tube, slowly, pausing twice along the way. And throughout it all, she talked to him, because she couldn't break a habit formed over 7 years, and because the room was so silent that if no one spoke, she was afraid of being alone with herself. 7, she counted as she bent his elbow. 8, you know, there's something I have to tell you honestly. 9, you're the easiest patient I've ever cared for in 7 years of nursing. 10, you haven't argued with me once. You haven't pressed the call button at 3 o'clock in the morning just to ask what time it is. You haven't complained that the blanket is cold, the pillow is hard, or the food is bland. She lowered his arm and moved to the other side. And I'm a terrible cook, truly terrible, but you haven't criticized me once. If people knew what an agreeable husband I have, they'd be dying of envy. She laughed to herself, but the sound faded very quickly. On the 6th day, she told him about her mother. My mother's name is Delia. She had a stroke 8 years ago and lost her voice. Now, whenever she wants to say something, she writes it down. Her handwriting is even more beautiful than it was before she became ill. Can you believe that? Some days she writes 3 lines for me, and when I finish reading them, I have to turn away. People told me she was alive because of the family she worked for. The family paid her wages. The family paid for her medicine. The family gave her a place to live. After hearing it long enough, I began to believe it too. I believed it so completely that I didn't dare question a single thing for 12 years. She wiped the corner of his mouth with a damp piece of gauze. Do you know why I'm here? She fell silent for a moment. Because I didn't dare ask questions. On the 8th day, she sat down in the chair and didn't rise again. I'm afraid, Alessio. That's the first time I've ever said your name aloud. If I pronounced it wrong, you'll have to tell me. I'm afraid that one day, someone in this house will look at me and ask me a question I can't answer. I'm afraid your mother will call me her daughter one more time. Every time she does, I feel as though I'm stealing something that belongs to someone else. She leaned forward, resting both elbows on her knees. You're the only person in this house who knows everything about me. It's fortunate that you can't speak. If you could, I'd be finished. On the 10th day, rain fell throughout the afternoon, and Ruby stayed longer than usual. She wiped his hands, one finger at a time, then gently set his hand down. And as she had during every night shift for 7 years, when there was nothing left to do and nothing left to say, she began to sing softly. It was an old, slow song, with one long note at the end of a line that always left her short of breath. She sang it through once, then began again, more quietly. In the hallway, Cormac Doyle stood several steps from the door, holding the file he'd intended to bring inside, and he remained there until her song had ended. Inside the room, on the monitor beside the bed, the monitor that for 2 years had traced such an unwavering line that no one bothered to look at it anymore, a tiny fluctuation appeared, and then vanished. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Ruby was bending down to fold a towel. Cormac was staring at the hallway floor. No one in that house saw it. Ruby's phone vibrated while she was washing her hands outside the changing room. The number was unfamiliar, and she nearly didn't answer. Hello, new bride. Ruby recognized the voice at once. What do you want? I only wanted to see how you're doing. What's it like in there? Are the blankets warm? Are they feeding you properly? What do you want, Miss Vaughn? All right, I'll get to the point. My family has submitted a bid for a contract at Calumet Harbor, the transportation and warehousing portion. The Ferrante family has the authority to decide who gets it. Camilla has grown very fond of you, and I hear she even gave you the ring. Ruby didn't answer. All you have to do is say one thing to her. Just one thing. Tell her you've heard that the Vaughn family conducts business honorably, and that you hope the two families will preserve their old ties. She'll listen to you. And then what? Then I'll pay you $300,000. Cash, no paperwork, and no one will ever know. Ruby leaned back against the sink. $300,000. She did the calculations in her head so quickly that the speed of it frightened even her. That much money would pay for her mother's medicine for 15 years. It would buy a small apartment with an elevator, so her mother would never again have to climb the back stairs of someone else's house. It would give Ruby the day when she could look her mother in the eyes and say that from then on, no one else would ever pay their way again. Are you still there? I'm here. 400,000. I'll give you 400. Miss Vaughn. What? I haven't taken a single penny from this family. I haven't opened the bank account Camilla set up for me. I haven't touched a single thing in the wardrobe, and I'm still wearing the clothes I brought from home. Do you know why? Because you want to seem noble. Because I'm living under your name. I eat at their table under your name, and I sleep in their house under your name. I've already taken far too much from them. I won't take anything more. The other end of the line went silent for several seconds. You truly are a servant's daughter. Yes, and my father was a servant too. Ruby ended the call. The following afternoon, she asked for permission to go out for 2 hours. She took the bus, got off 2 blocks from the Vaughn house, and went around to the back entrance as she had for the past 12 years. The little room behind the house was still the same. Her mother sat beside the window with a notebook and pen resting in her lap. Delia looked up, and her face brightened in a way Ruby knew she would remember for the rest of her life. She set the notebook down and held out both hands, and Ruby dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around her mother. Delia stroked her daughter's hair for a long time. Then she gently pushed Ruby back, picked up her pen, and wrote, "Are you all right?" Ruby stared at those words. She thought of the name that wasn't hers on the marriage certificate, the ring tucked inside her inner pocket, the man who hadn't opened his eyes in 2 years even though she sat beside him every night, and the question she feared someone in that house would eventually ask her. "I'm all right, Mom." Delia looked at her daughter. Then she wrote again, "Look at me. I really am all right." Her mother studied her for another moment, then closed the notebook and wrote nothing more, and Ruby knew she didn't believe her. How touching. Bernadette Vaughn stood in the doorway with one hand braced against the frame. "You came back without telling anyone." "I came to visit my mother." "Yes, to visit your mother. Come outside. We need to talk." Once they reached the backyard, Bernadette folded her arms. "Priscilla told me you refused." "Yes. Do you think you're in a position of power now?" "I don't think anything." "Then let me tell you exactly where you stand." Bernadette lowered her voice, and that voice was even more unpleasant than when she shouted. "You think you have money now, that you can buy your mother's medicine and don't need us anymore. I won't stop you. Go ahead and buy it. Then why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to remember one thing. Who signed that marriage certificate?" "You did." "Whose hand made the forged signature on it?" "Yours." "Who walked into the Ferrante home under another woman's name, lived there, ate their food, and accepted their ring?" She smiled. "Go speak to their lawyers, and then ask them what they call that." Ruby stood perfectly still. "What does my family lose?" "A contract. At worst, our pride. But you lose your freedom, and your mother will sit in that room while someone tells her what her daughter has done." Bernadette stepped closer. "So keep your money. We don't need it. We only need you to keep your mouth shut." On the ride back, Ruby sat in the last row of the bus with one hand resting over her inner pocket, where she carried a ring and an employee badge. She had believed the thing binding her was a handful of blister packs filled with medicine. Now she understood that money had never been what held her captive. On Monday morning, Camilla placed an envelope on the dining table and pushed it toward Ruby. "This is yours." Inside was a bank card and a sheet of paper with the identification number printed on it. "I opened the account for you yesterday. Spend whatever you want. You don't have to ask anyone. I don't need it. I know you don't. But my son's wife doesn't leave the house with nothing in her wallet." Camilla rose, gently patted Ruby's shoulder, and walked away, leaving the envelope on the table. Ruby picked it up, placed it in the desk drawer in her room, and closed the drawer. 3 weeks later, the envelope was still lying exactly where she'd left it, unopened a second time. The household staff began to notice. One of the maids saw the new mistress of the house carrying her own clothes down to the laundry room, selecting the washing cycle herself, then laying several sweaters out to dry on the balcony outside her room, because she said the dryer damaged the fibers. The driver saw her walk through the gates to catch a bus, while 3 cars sat parked in the courtyard. The housekeeper asked whether she needed anything else ordered, and Ruby said no. She said no again the following week, and once more the week after that. She wore the same 3 shirts over and over. One had begun to fray around the collar, and one evening, while sitting in his room and telling him some story, she turned the collar inside out and repaired it with white thread. Once, she went to a pharmacy in town to buy medicine for her mother, and the pharmacist told her she could save $12 by purchasing the larger box. Ruby stood there calculating for a moment, then chose the smaller one because the larger box cost $48, and she had only $31 in her wallet. Cormac Doyle saw it happen. He was sitting in a car parked across the street, and he hadn't intended to watch, but he did. That evening, he called one of his people at the bank. 3 days later, he carried a stack of papers upstairs to Camilla's room. "May I have a few minutes? Is this about the girl?" "Yes." Camilla took off her glasses and set them down. "Go ahead. The account you opened for her has been active for 3 weeks. There hasn't been a single transaction. No withdrawals, no transfers, no card purchases. The card hasn't even been activated." "I know. You know? I've been watching that drawer since the first week." Cormac turned to the second page. "And this is her personal account, the old payroll account from the hospital. The balance is $412. She spent money 3 times this month. Once on medicine, once on a monthly bus pass, and once on sewing thread and a roll of gauze." "Gauze?" "She's been buying her own supplies and bringing them into Mr. Ferrante's room. The gauze they've been using in the house leaves marks on his skin. She didn't tell anyone, and she didn't ask anyone to approve the expense. She paid for it herself." Camilla remained silent for a very long time. "Why did you bring this to me, Cormac?" The man had served in this house for 11 years and had never spoken a single unnecessary word. He folded the papers closed. "On the day she arrived, I called to report that she wasn't who we thought she was. At the time, I meant it in a bad way. And now? Now I stand by those exact words, but I understand them differently." He bowed his head and left. Camilla remained there alone, staring at the papers on the table. Then she rose, walked down the hallway, and stopped outside the final door. Inside, someone was counting 10 repetitions for each joint in his hands, and between each count came a joke Camilla couldn't quite hear. On the 11th night, Ruby woke before the alarm went off. She lay still for a few seconds, not understanding what had awakened her, and then she heard it. The machine in the room at the end of the hallway was sounding in the wrong rhythm. She ran barefoot down the cold hallway and pushed open the door shortly before 3 o'clock in the morning. His pulse had fallen below 45. His oxygen saturation was dropping point by point on the monitor, and the skin around his lips had already changed color. Ruby pressed the alarm button at the head of the bed, then dialed Dr. Whitfield's number with her left hand while her right lowered the bed rail. "The patient has been comatose for 2 years. Pulse is 43. Oxygen saturation is 84. And falling, no fever, diminished breath sounds in the left lung," she said into the phone, her voice as steady as if she were reading a report. "I'm suctioning him now. Where's the car?" She placed the phone on the pillow, turned on the speaker, and went to work. She raised the head of the bed, turned him onto his side, opened the suction kit, and guided the tube in. "Listen to me, Alessio. Your airway is obstructed. It's not your heart, and it's not your brain. It's only mucus. I can get it out." She suctioned once, stopped to let him breathe, then suctioned again. "That's the first one done. I know it's terribly uncomfortable. Bear with me a little longer." The reading rose by 2 points, then fell again. Ruby repositioned him once more, performed chest percussion, counted, and suctioned again. Sweat ran down her temple. 87. "You see? I told you. If you leave me now, you're going to cause me a great deal of trouble. Camilla will ask me what I was doing last night. Mr. Doyle will stand in the corner of the room and look at me with that expression on his face. 90. All right, all right." Cormac's men kicked the door open at 3:20, and Dr. Whitfield arrived at 3:40. She listened to his lungs, reviewed every reading, repositioned him, and ordered the intravenous line replaced. By 4:30, his pulse had returned to 62 and remained stable. The doctor removed the stethoscope from her ears. If you'd been 10 minutes later, I would have had a very different conversation with Camilla tonight. She looked at Ruby. Sit down. You're trembling. Camilla embraced Ruby in the doorway without saying a word, then followed the doctor outside. Cormac ordered everyone to leave. The door closed. The only things left in the room were the steady hum of the machines and a woman sitting on the floor with her back against the side of the bed. Ruby looked at her hands. They were still trembling. In 7 years of nursing, she'd lived through dozens of nights like this, and never once had she sat down on the floor afterward. She didn't understand why tonight was different, and by the time she did, the tears had already begun to fall. I'm sorry, she said, raising her hands to cover her face. I'm not allowed to cry in a patient's room. They taught me that in my first year. She tried to stop, but she couldn't. I was so frightened, Alessio. I was afraid you were going to leave tonight. But what right do I have to be afraid? I've only been here for 11 days. I'm carrying someone else's name, sitting in someone else's place. And now I'm sitting here crying as though I were someone who mattered to you. But your mother couldn't bear it. She's been sitting in that chair for 2 years. If you leave, she'll follow you. I mean it. She wiped her face with her sleeve, stood up, pulled the blanket to his shoulders, and adjusted the pillow beneath his elbow. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and didn't know what to do next. Dawn hadn't come. The machines continued their steady rhythm, and because there was nothing left to do and nothing left to say, Ruby began to sing. It was the same old song, slow and rougher than usual because she'd just been crying. When she reached the long note at the end of the line, she ran out of breath as she always did. She sang the song once, then began it a second time, and halfway through the second verse, a hand beneath the blanket moved faintly. Ruby stopped. She looked down, then she looked at his face. Alessio Ferrante opened his eyes. Those eyes stared directly at her, clouded and unable to focus, but they were looking at her. His lips moved. A sound emerged, hoarse, broken in two, and so faint that it would have vanished beneath the machines if they'd been running even a little louder. Ruby stood frozen, not daring to breathe, not daring to blink, unsure whether she'd truly heard 2 words, or only what she desperately wanted to hear. Camilla ran into the room with her hair still untied. She stopped motionless in the doorway, looked at her son, then at Ruby, then back at her son again. He opened his eyes. Yes. For about 4 minutes. His eyes are closed again now, but he isn't in a coma anymore. He's sleeping. Camilla went to the bedside, dropped to her knees, pressed her forehead against her son's hand, and wept aloud. She cried the way someone cries after holding it in for 2 years. Then she stood, turned around, and pulled Ruby into her arms, holding her so tightly that Ruby couldn't breathe. Thank you, my child. Thank you. Mom, I didn't. Don't say anything. Dr. Whitfield arrived at 7 o'clock. She examined him for 30 minutes, ordered another electroencephalogram, then sat down with the expression of someone preparing to put out a fire. Before this family starts calling every relative with the news, I need to say a few things. Go ahead, doctor. He has emerged from the coma. That's real, and I'm glad. But this isn't a movie. He'll wake up and drift away again many times over the next few days. He may manage a few scattered words, then be unable to say anything the following day. He still has difficulty swallowing. His muscles have atrophied, and he can't even sit up yet. The road ahead will be longer than the 2 years behind us. Camilla nodded. There's one more thing, and I'm saying it so the family doesn't misunderstand. She looked directly at Camilla. Recovery after 2 years is rare, but it isn't unheard of, and no one can identify a single cause. A familiar voice, physical contact, consistent care, the infection clearing, the reduction of a medication dose that was too high. All those things may have contributed, but no one can prove it. So don't tell Miss Mercer that she awakened your son. I don't want her carrying that on her shoulders. If he gets worse one day, she'll think it's her fault. Camilla remained silent for a long time. You're right, doctor. What I can record in the medical file is that someone handled the first 15 minutes correctly last night. That's all we know, and even that is already a great deal. 3 days later, Alessio began speaking in short sentences. Ruby was changing the sheets on the window side of the bed when she heard his voice behind her, hoarse and slow, each word requiring a separate breath. You're A terrible cook. Ruby let the sheet fall. She turned around very slowly. What did you say? You said, you're a terrible cook, truly terrible. He closed his eyes for a moment to gather his strength, then opened them again. But I haven't criticized you once. Ruby stood rooted to the floor in the middle of the room, still clutching the corner of the sheet. How long have you been able to hear me? I'm not sure. Only the last few days, he breathed out. Your voice is the loudest thing in this room. How much did you hear? Enough to know. I'm the easiest patient you've cared for in 7 years. He paused to take another breath. Because I don't press the call button at 3 o'clock in the morning, just to ask what time it is. Ruby collapsed into the chair. Oh my God. You also said, if people knew what an agreeable husband you had, they'd be dying of envy. Could you forget that part? No. You've only been awake for 3 days. For the past 3 days, I've been lying here with nothing to do. He closed his eyes, and one corner of his mouth lifted ever so slightly. You counted wrong. On Wednesday. I never count wrong. You counted. 7, 8, 9, 9. Ruby opened her mouth to argue, then remembered that on Wednesday she'd been counting while telling him about her mother, and she fell silent. Mr. Ferrante. Yes. You lay there in silence for 2 years, and now you've been awake for exactly 3 days, and you're already correcting me. You said I hadn't argued with you once. He opened his eyes and looked at her. I'm arguing now. Outside the door, Camilla had heard everything from the beginning, one hand covering her mouth and the other gripping the doorframe, but she didn't step inside. She turned away and walked down the hallway, and it wasn't until she rounded the corner that she finally allowed herself to cry. On Thursday morning, Alessio told Ruby to summon Cormac. He still couldn't sit up on his own and needed 3 pillows propped behind his back, and after every 10 sentences, he had to stop and rest. But when Cormac entered the room, the man halted in the middle of the doorway, straightened his back, and bowed his head in a way Ruby had never seen him do to anyone. Sir, close the door. Cormac closed it. Ruby was about to leave, but Alessio shifted his gaze toward her. Stay. This is a family matter. I shouldn't. Stay. She remained beside the head of the bed. How long has it been? Alessio asked. 2 years and 1 month, sir. Who took my place? Uncle Rocco. A very brief silence settled over the room. Ruby didn't understand why that silence sent a chill down her spine. Tell me. For the first 3 months, he only signed documents on your behalf. After that, he began making decisions himself. Nearly all your men at the harbor were transferred out and replaced by men he brought in. Cormac spoke slowly and precisely, without adding a single unnecessary word. He's given far more to charity than he did 2 years ago. Schools, churches, hospitals. The newspapers have written very favorably about him. And my mother? Camilla hasn't left your room for a single day. She hasn't attended meetings or signed anything. So, he's had a free hand. Yes. Alessio closed his eyes. He remained still for so long that Ruby thought he'd slipped away again. Then he opened them. Cormac. Yes. No one can know I'm awake. Cormac raised his head. Sir? No one. No relatives, no business partners. No one in this house except those who've already been in this room. I'll speak to Dr. Whitfield myself. As far as the outside world is concerned, I'm still lying here exactly as I have been for the past 2 years. I need to understand why, sir. Because 2 years ago, I drove out of the harbor close to midnight, and that car had no brakes. He stopped to catch his breath, and during the 2 years I've been lying here, the person who benefited most from what happened took my chair. You suspect Uncle Rocco. I don't suspect anyone. I woke up 5 days ago. I can't even sit upright, and I don't have a single document in my hands. If the entire city learns that I've opened my eyes, what do I gain? People will come to visit, bring flowers, and take photographs. Meanwhile, someone will have time to clean everything up. He turned his head and looked at Cormac. I want to see what people do while they believe I'm still lying here. Cormac remained silent for several seconds. It'll be difficult to keep this from the household staff. Then make it difficult for them to talk. Reduce the number of people allowed into this hallway to 5. Food, medicine, and laundry are to be brought to the door and left there. The doctor will come at hours when no one is paying attention. And Camilla? My mother must behave exactly as she has for the past 2 years. She'll keep sitting in that chair, and she'll wear the same expression whenever she leaves this room. I'll speak to her." Cormac nodded. "For how long, sir? Until I can stand up from this bed without anyone helping me." He breathed out, and his voice dropped lower. "Leave everything exactly as it is. Don't investigate, don't ask questions, and don't touch anyone. Anyone who feels safe should be allowed to keep feeling safe." "Yes, sir. One more thing." "Yes. Find the car for me. The car from that night, what was left of it. Find out whether it still exists, or whether it was disposed of." "I'll find it." Cormac bowed his head and left the room. The door closed behind him. Ruby remained where she was, still holding the towel she'd had in her hand since Alessio summoned Cormac, and she realized that this room was no longer the same room she had entered 16 days earlier. Everything in it remained unchanged. The same bed, Camilla's same chair, the same steady hum of the machines. But the man lying in the bed was different. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his eyes still closed. "No, you're a terrible liar." Ruby didn't answer. He opened his eyes, and this time, his gaze had regained its focus. "You heard everything. Now you're one of the people who must keep this secret." "Yes. Are you good at keeping secrets?" Ruby tightened her grip on the towel. "Fairly good." The 3 weeks that followed were the longest 3 weeks of Alessio Ferrante's life. During the first week, he practiced sitting up. Ruby slipped an arm behind his back, counted to 3, and lifted him. But each time he could hold himself upright for only about 2 minutes before he had to lie down again, his face deathly pale, and his heart pounding as though he'd just run a great distance. Again. "That's enough for today." Again. "Mr. Ferrante, your heart rate is 130. If you want to sit up longer, you have to accept lying down now." He stared at her for a long moment, then lay back. During the second week, he practiced holding a spoon. It fell twice during the first meal, and Ruby said nothing. She simply picked it up, washed it, and handed it back to him. The third time, he let it fall onto the blanket and made no attempt to retrieve it. "Feed me." "No, you're a nurse." "Yes, which is why I know that if I feed you today, 3 months from now, you'll still need someone to feed you." She pushed the spoon back toward him. "And if you become too hungry, just tell me. I'll leave it here and step outside. No one will see you drop it." He picked up the spoon. By the third week, his voice had almost returned to what it had once been, low and steady, and he no longer had to draw breath between sentences. He also began doing something Ruby noticed but never mentioned. He watched her, not in the way a patient watched the person caring for him. He watched how she worked. He watched her glance at the monitor while her hands continued tying a strap, then say, "It only dropped 2 points because you just turned over," without needing to pause. He watched her remove the dressing from the catheter site, peeling it inward from the outer edge, one hand holding the skin while the other pulled in the opposite direction, disinfecting the area in circles from the center outward, applying a fresh dressing, then writing the date in the corner with a ballpoint pen. The entire procedure took less than 2 minutes, and she performed it as naturally as someone tying a shoelace. "How many times have you done this?" "Many." "How many is many?" "I don't count." He nodded and let the silence remain for a while. "Where did the Vaughn daughter study nursing?" Ruby kept her head lowered as she wrote the date in the corner of the dressing. "Why are you asking?" "Because I'm curious." "At school." "Which school?" "Lie still so I can check this." "Which school, Miss Vaughn?" She straightened, then capped the pen. "You sat up for 4 full minutes today. That's a record. Would you like to hear about that, or would you rather talk about school?" He watched her a little longer before letting the matter go. 4 minutes. 4 minutes and 10 seconds. That afternoon, when Ruby bent to pick up a towel that had fallen beside the bed, a small object slipped from the inner pocket of her clothing and landed on the floor beside one of the bed's wheels. She didn't hear it. She picked up the towel, stood, and carried it to the sink. Alessio leaned to the side, braced himself on one elbow, and reached down. It took him 2 attempts to pick it up. It was an old plastic identification card with worn corners and a frayed lanyard. Her photograph was on it, taken several years earlier, with her hair tied higher than it was now. Beside the photograph was a printed line. R. Mercer. Registered nurse. He didn't call out to her. He didn't say anything. He simply sat there, holding the card in both hands and staring at it. He stared for a very long time. Ruby finished wringing out the towel, turned around, and saw it in his hands. She stopped in the middle of the room. The blood drained from her face so quickly that she had to grab the bed rail. She opened her mouth, but not a single word came out. Alessio raised his eyes to her. He looked at her for exactly 3 seconds, then he held out the card. Ruby stepped forward and took it. Her fingers brushed his, and she recoiled as though she'd been burned. She slipped the card back into her pocket, fastened the button, and stood there waiting. She waited for the question. She waited for him to summon someone. She waited for everything she'd imagined throughout the 20-something days she'd spent in that room. He asked nothing. "It's 4 o'clock, he said. "Time for your leg exercises." That night, after the lights along the entire hallway had been turned off, Alessio reached for the phone on the bedside table and dialed a number. Cormac answered after the first ring. "Sir, do you remember when I told you the other day not to investigate anyone?" "I remember. There's one thing you still need to do." "Yes. Investigate my wife." The other end of the line went silent. "And investigate Priscilla Vaughn as well. I want to know where she is, how she's living, and what she's been doing for the past 2 years. Sir," quietly, "no one can know, not even my mother." The next morning, Ruby appeared in the doorway with a bag in her hand. "I'd like to move to the other wing." Alessio was sitting propped against the pillows, holding a glass of water. He set it down. "Where are you going?" "I'm only changing rooms. I'll still be in this house." "You're in the adjoining room, 13 feet away from me." "Yes, that's the problem. You've been there for 3 weeks. For those 3 weeks, you were lying there. Now I'm sitting up." "Exactly." He looked at the bag in her hand. "Tell me the real reason." "The real reason is that you're awake now. You can speak. You can summon someone. And you don't need anyone sleeping 13 feet away to listen to the machines anymore. There are 4 people on night duty in this house. Any one of them can do that. Not one of those 4 people can hear a machine falling out of rhythm through 2 closed doors at 3 o'clock in the morning." Ruby tightened her grip on the bag's handles. "I was only lucky that night." "You weren't lucky. You were trained." He gestured toward the chair beside the bed. "Sit down. Standing there holding that bag makes you look like you're about to run away." She didn't sit. "Mr. Ferrante, I'm going to be honest with you." "Go ahead." "I came into this house to care for you. That's my job, and I do it to the best of my ability. But I'm not staying in that room to be anyone's wife. You understand what I mean, don't you?" Alessio looked at her for a moment. Then he spoke, and his voice didn't rise even slightly. "You've been in that adjoining room since the first night. For more than 20 days, I lay here unable to move, and with no one watching me. Did you ever lock your door?" "No, because you knew there was nothing you needed to lock it against. Now that I can sit up, that still hasn't changed. I haven't invited you into this room. I never have, and I never will." Ruby said nothing. "Go ask my mother whether anyone in this house has ever been touched by another person without consent. Then come back and give me your answer." "I don't need to ask." "Then what are you afraid of?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She couldn't say what she was afraid of. She was afraid that if she stayed close to him for one more day, she would forget whose chair she was borrowing. "All right," he said. "I'll ask another way. If I were a patient in your hospital who had just awakened from a 3-week coma, whose heart still fell out of rhythm at night, and who couldn't yet stand without assistance, would you leave me alone 2 hallways away from the nurse's station?" Ruby remained silent. "Answer me only as a nurse." "No." "Then don't use your position as my wife to argue with me." She set the bag on the floor. "You're a very difficult man to talk to. Do you know that? People have told me." "What people?" "Many people. They've grown much quieter over the past 2 years." Ruby turned toward the window so he wouldn't see her struggling not to laugh. "I'll stay in the adjoining room, but I have conditions." "Name them." "From now on, I'm locking my door." "Lock it. And you're not allowed to call me in the middle of the night just to ask what time it is." Alessio picked up his glass of water. "Have I ever pressed the call button at 3 o'clock in the morning just to ask what time it is? You've only been able to hear for 10 days, and you've already memorized everything? I've been lying here with nothing to do." She picked up her bag and walked toward the door. "Miss Mercer." Ruby stopped. It was the first time anyone in that house had called her by that name. She stood motionless with her back to him, not daring to turn around. "Sleep well," he said. She stepped outside, closed the door, and stood in the darkened hallway for a very long time, one hand still resting on the doorknob. Cormac set the file on the desk without opening it. I'll warn you first, sir. Once you hear this, you can't take it back. Tell me. The woman living in this house isn't Priscilla Vaughn. Her name is Ruby Mercer. She's 27 years old, a nurse at a public hospital. And her mother is Delia Mercer, who has worked as the Vaughn family's housekeeper for the past 8 years. Alessio didn't move. Priscilla Vaughn has never set foot in this house. She's still living with her parents. The signature on the marriage certificate was forged. Who did it? Harold Vaughn and Bernadette Vaughn. Alessio sat motionless for a very long time. Then he told Cormac to leave and send her in. Ruby entered the room with a tray of medicine in her hands. She looked at the file on the desk, then at his face, and set the tray down. You know, I've known for 11 days, ever since that identification card fell out of your pocket. He spoke very slowly. For the past 11 days, I've let you change my dressings, give me my medicine, help me sit up, and I've waited. I waited for you to tell me. I was going to. When? She couldn't answer. Do you know what you said to me before I opened my eyes? He looked straight at her. You said it was fortunate that I couldn't speak, because if I could, you'd already be dead. You heard that differently. You said I was the only person in this house who knew everything about you. That's true. You said every time my mother called you her daughter, you felt as though you were stealing something that belonged to someone else. Ruby stood frozen. You were right, he said. You really did steal it. You heard those words when I thought no one could hear me. That was when I was most honest. People are often most honest when they believe no one is listening. He reached for the file, opened it, and pushed it toward her. The Vaughns were able to sign this marriage certificate because they needed a contract at the harbor. Do you know how much that contract is worth? No. Then where do you stand in all of this? I stand where my mother was sitting. She spoke, but her voice broke in the middle of the sentence, and she had to stop to catch her breath. Mr. Vaughn summoned me to the living room. He told me I was going to marry in his daughter's place. I said no. Do you hear me clearly? I said no right there, without needing a moment to think. Then what? Then they said my mother would lose her job, lose her home, and lose her medicine. My mother lost her voice 8 years ago. She can't argue a single word with anyone. I had 3 days to memorize another woman's birthday. And you agreed. Yes, I agreed. Did you know whose house you were walking into? No. I only knew which house I was walking out of. Alessio fell silent. You tell a very good story, he said. You don't believe me. What do you want me to believe? That someone who was forced into this couldn't find a single minute in more than 20 days to tell anyone the truth? You sat beside my mother every morning. You spoke to me for hours when you thought I couldn't hear you. You could speak to a man in a coma, but you couldn't speak to a man who was awake. Ruby didn't answer because he was right. I've met plenty of women who came to me for money, he said. At least they were honest enough to say they wanted money. But you took the name as well. What do you want me to do now? Divorce me. She stood motionless for about 3 seconds. Then she reached into the inner pocket of her coat, took out the ring, and placed it on the desk. She walked to the desk drawer in the corner of the room, opened it, took out the envelope Camilla had given her that day, and placed it beside the ring. The envelope still bore its original folds. The card and the code are inside. Have someone check them. Do you think I need to check? I don't think anything. I'm only returning it. She took 1 step back. I haven't worn any of the clothes in the closet. They're still on their hangers. The watch, the bracelets, and the things your mother gave me are in a box in the second drawer. Have someone count them and make sure everything is there. Why are you doing this? So you won't have to ask. Ruby lowered her eyes to her hands. I never asked for any of it. She walked toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. The dressing around your catheter site needs to be changed on Tuesday and Friday mornings. Peel it inward from the outer edge. Don't let a new nurse pull it straight off. And don't skip your afternoon therapy, Miss Mercer. She didn't turn around. You may leave. She opened the door and stepped outside. The ring lay on the desk beside the unopened envelope, and Alessio Ferrante sat staring at it until darkness had completely fallen. Camilla learned the truth before dawn. She went straight into her son's room without knocking and placed the ring and the envelope on his lap. Explain this to me. Mother, sit down first. I can stand. Alessio exhaled. She isn't Priscilla Vaughn. Her name is Ruby Mercer, the daughter of the housekeeper who works for that family. The documents are forged. You and I have been deceived for 2 months. I already know. Cormac told me at 4 o'clock this morning. Then you understand why I have to end it. I understand what you intend to do. I don't understand why. She pulled a chair closer and sat facing him, and when she spoke again, her voice was no longer that of the woman who had spent 2 years sitting beside a sickbed. You're going to listen to me once, and then you can do whatever you want. 2 months ago, I went to the Vaughn house. I sat in their living room. I'm your mother, and I went there to beg for a name to put on a piece of paper, because you were 3 days away from losing everything. Do you know how Priscilla Vaughn answered me? Mother, don't tell me. She said she wouldn't marry a breathing corpse. Alessio turned his face away. She said it directly to my face, in her own home, while her father sat beside her and didn't say a single word in my defense. I walked out to my car that day, and I sat there for exactly 20 minutes before I could drive away. She picked up the ring. Then 3 days later, a young woman walked into this room. She came in, and she didn't turn around and run. On the first night, she discovered that you'd been overdosed for 1.5 years. On the 11th night, she heard a machine fall out of rhythm through 2 closed doors, and she ran barefoot down the hallway. Mother, she deceived everyone in this house. She was forced. Alessio. Everyone says they were forced. Cormac. The door opened. Cormac stepped inside holding a stack of papers. Tell him what you told me at 4 o'clock this morning. Yes, ma'am. He placed the papers on the desk. The account Mrs. Camilla opened for her was established 2 months and 10 days ago. There hasn't been a single transaction. The card hasn't been activated. I checked again this morning. Nothing has changed. Alessio said nothing, and this is her personal account. During the 2 months she has lived in this house, she made 41 purchases. I've listed every one of them here. Medicine for her mother, a monthly bus pass, 1 spool of sewing thread, and 32 purchases of medical supplies. Medical supplies. Gauze, medical tape, antiseptic solution, and small pressure relief pads. The kind we were using left marks on your skin, so she changed to another kind. She didn't tell anyone or ask for approval. She paid for them with money she had earned at her old job. Cormac closed the file. The total amount she spent caring for you over the past 2 months is greater than the balance remaining in her account today. No one in the room said anything. One day, I saw her standing in a pharmacy. Cormac continued, his voice dropping lower. The clerk told her the large box would save her $12. She stood there calculating for a while, then bought the small box because she had $31 in her wallet. He lowered his head. I was the first person to report my suspicions about her, sir. I held on to those suspicions for the entire 2 months. But when something is true, I have to say it. He left the room. Camilla placed the ring on the desk directly in front of her son. If you want to leave her, then leave her. But listen to me carefully. If you leave her because you're humiliated that you were deceived, rather than because she is guilty, I'll take back all the operational authority I handed over to you 2 years ago. Are you serious? I am. You're threatening me over a woman you've known for only 2 months. I'm threatening you because for the past 2 years, I've sat in that chair alone, and the second person who sat down beside me was her. She rose to her feet. You're still very weak. You can't stand on your own yet. Leave the divorce alone for now. When you can walk again, then you can decide. She reached the door, then stopped. There is one more thing I want to ask you. Has anyone changed your dressing this morning? No. Why? Alessio didn't answer. Camilla closed the door behind her. Ruby remained in that house. No one told her she was allowed to stay, and no one told her she had to leave. Meals were still prepared for her. The staff still called her the young mistress in the hallways, and on the document locked inside the Ferrante family safe, she still bore another woman's name. She continued doing her work at the same hours as before. Only one thing changed. From that day forward, for 9 consecutive days, the 2 people in the room at the end of the hallway didn't exchange a single word except those concerning his medicine. Nearly 4 months after the day he opened his eyes, Alessio Ferrante walked out of that house on his own for the first time. He still needed a cane, and moved very slowly. But he could walk, and that was precisely the milestone he had once mentioned to Cormac. Throughout those 4 months, aside from the 5 people who had stood in that hallway, the entire city of Chicago still believed he was lying exactly as he had for the past 2 years. Dr. Whitfield allowed him to go out for exactly 2 hours. Cormac reserved a table under another name at a restaurant on the north side, choosing the farthest corner, concealed behind a wooden screen. Alessio told Ruby to accompany him, and when she tried to refuse, he said she was responsible for monitoring him, and if he fell in the street, she would have to answer to the doctor. It was the longest sentence he had spoken to her in weeks. Ruby went to the counter to get him some water, and she had been standing there for less than a minute when someone called her name. Except it wasn't her name. "Miss Vaughn," Priscilla said, drawing out every word. "Doesn't that sound strange to your ears? What are you doing here? My family has had a standing reservation here for 4 years. She looked Ruby up and down, stopping at the worn collar of her sweater, which had been mended with white thread. "You've lived in the Ferrante house for 4 months, and you're still wearing this. I suppose some things can never be changed. I'm getting some water, and then I'm leaving. Do you know what your mother did yesterday? She knelt and scrubbed the back staircase of my house. She couldn't even make a sound when she slipped." Priscilla laughed. "It's been 12 years. That's all her life has ever amounted to, while you're sitting here dining." The person behind the counter turned away. At 2 nearby tables, the conversation stopped. Ruby set the glass of water on the counter. "My mother earns her living with her own hands. You're living off a name you don't even dare to bear." Priscilla stood motionless for a second. Then the color of her face changed. "Say that again." "I've said all I have to say. You're a servant's daughter and you dare." "What's going on here?" The restaurant manager approached. Priscilla turned toward him, and her voice rose high enough for half the dining room to hear. "I want this woman removed. She came in here using my family's name." "Miss, that table was reserved in advance. Do you know who I am? That table belongs to my family. She's the daughter of my family's housekeeper. She has no right to sit here." "Miss, and who is the man sitting back there? Is she here with another man?" Priscilla spun toward the wooden screen. "That's right. You have a husband lying paralyzed at home, don't you? All of Chicago knows Alessio Ferrante has been confined to a bed for the past 2 years, while his wife is out dining with another man." She walked around the screen. "Sir, I suggest you understand that she's a married woman, and if that doesn't frighten you, then let me tell you something else. One phone call from me, and your career is over." The man seated in the corner set down his cup of coffee. He looked up. Priscilla Vaughn froze in the middle of the aisle. The entire dining room fell silent. "You should make that call," Alessio said. The coffee cup in the manager's hand struck its saucer. He stepped back and bowed his head. "Mr. Ferrante?" "No." Priscilla shook her head. "No, you're lying. You just called me a breathing corpse, didn't you?" Leaning on his cane, he rose to his feet. He moved slowly, but he stood straight. "My mother heard those words. She sat in your house and begged for a name to put on a piece of paper for her son, and that was how you answered her. Mr. Ferrante, Cormac." "Yes, sir. Call the lawyers. Withdraw every Vaughn bid at the harbor today. Stop every active contract we have with them. Cancel every invitation and every appointment." "Yes, sir. And send notice to the harbor's 3 largest partners. Just tell them one thing. The Ferrante family no longer does business with the Vaughn family." "You can't do that." Priscilla stepped forward. "My father will. Your father forged documents to place someone inside my house. Go home and ask him what people call that." He looked at her for exactly 3 seconds before turning to Ruby. "Miss Mercer, get your coat. It's time for me to take my medicine." Ruby picked up his coat. As they walked past, Priscilla remained where she was, one hand gripping the back of a chair. By that afternoon, the Vaughn family's 2 largest partners had called to postpone signing. By the end of the week, that number had risen to 5. The car left the restaurant at nearly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Alessio sat in the back seat with his head resting against the seat and his eyes closed, while Ruby sat beside him with the medicine box on her lap. "You're white as a sheet. The doctor gave you 2 hours, and it's already been 2 hours and 10 minutes. "I know. As soon as we get home, you're going straight to bed. No meetings, nothing. You give me too many orders. I'm only repeating the doctor's orders." Cormac was sitting in the front seat, and Ruby saw him glance at the rearview mirror for the 3rd time in less than a minute. "Is something wrong? That gray car behind us has been following us since we left the north side." Alessio opened his eyes. "Change the route." "I already did. It's still following us." The car turned onto a narrow street between 2 rows of warehouses, and Ruby would always remember that what crossed her mind in that instant wasn't fear, but the question of why the driver had turned into a place like this. Then a small truck pulled out and blocked the road ahead. The driver slammed on the brakes. Cormac shouted something Ruby couldn't make out. Figures ran toward the car doors. Ruby didn't have time to think. She only saw Alessio sitting beside the door on the left, one hand still resting on his cane. And she knew that 4 months earlier, this man hadn't even been able to sit up. She lunged across him, turned her back toward the door, pulled his head down, pressed him flat against the seat, and wrapped both arms around his head. Glass shattered. Then there was silence. When Ruby opened her eyes, it was over. Cormac was standing outside, breathing hard. 2 of his men were holding someone face down on the road. The small truck had vanished at the far end of the street, and the second man had run after it. Someone was making a phone call. Sirens wailed somewhere far away. Alessio sat up. The first thing he did wasn't look outside. He gripped Ruby by the shoulders and turned her around. "Are you hurt?" "No. Look at me. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." His gaze dropped to the left sleeve of her sweater. The wool had been torn in a long line from the elbow downward, and the sleeve was soaked dark. He called Cormac's name in a voice Ruby had never heard before. They were taken straight home. Dr. Whitfield arrived 40 minutes later, cleaned the wound, closed it with 7 stitches, and bandaged her arm from the elbow down. "It isn't deep, but it's long. Keep it dry for 5 days, and don't use this arm to lift anything." She turned to Alessio. "And you need to lie down. You've just undone 4 months of hard work in a single afternoon." When everyone had left, only the 2 of them remained in the room. Alessio sat on the edge of the bed. Ruby sat in the chair opposite him with her left hand resting palm up on her lap. "What were you doing?" "I don't understand what you mean." "In the car." "What were you doing?" "I pulled you down." "Why?" "Because you were sitting beside the door." "That isn't an answer." Ruby lowered her eyes to the white bandage around her arm. "How do you want me to answer? I want to know why someone I sent away 9 days ago used her own back to shield me." "You didn't send me away. You only told me to leave the room. I still worked every one of my shifts. Miss Mercer." "I didn't have time to think, all right?" She looked up. "You're asking me why, and I'm telling you the truth. I didn't have time to think about anything. I only knew that 4 months ago, you couldn't even sit up, and I was the one who sat beside you throughout those 4 months." Alessio was silent. "And if you want to write in your file that I did it to win your favor, then go ahead. I can't exactly argue with you. I don't think that. You've thought it for 9 days. "Yes," he said. "For 9 days." He rose, took 3 steps toward her, and did something very small. He took the pillow from the chair beside her and placed it beneath her left elbow to keep it elevated. "The doctor said keeping it raised would reduce the swelling," he said. Then he returned to the bed and lay down with his face turned toward the window, without saying another word. Ruby sat there for a very long time with her arm resting on the pillow, and she didn't dare move because she was afraid it would fall. 3 days later, Cormac came upstairs at 10 o'clock at night, carrying a stack of papers thicker than any he had brought before. "Are you able to sit up? Go ahead. The man detained that day is named Dale Pruitt. He hasn't said anything, but he doesn't need to. He received money through an account registered in his wife's name." He placed the first sheet on the table. That money was transferred from a small transportation company on the south side. The company has 3 employees and no vehicles. Who owns it? On paper, it belongs to a man named Vernon Slate. Slate is the accountant for the charitable foundation Uncle Rocco established 2.5 years ago. Alessio said nothing. "I traced that company's account further. It has been active since April the year before last. Over 2 years, it made 41 payments, all in small amounts, and none exceeding $20,000. Cormac turned to the second sheet. But 4 payments were different from all the others. Those 4 were made consecutively within 9 days, all to the same recipient. Which 9 days? The 9 days before the night you drove out of the harbor. The only sound left in the room was the hum of the air conditioner. Alessio reached for the paper. He read it very slowly from top to bottom, then read it again. Who was the recipient? Only an abbreviated name is listed there. I haven't traced it yet. But the recipient made 3 cash withdrawals from the same branch, and that branch is exactly 1 block from the auto repair shop our family used at the time. Alessio set the paper down. The car I told you to find. It was crushed and sold for scrap 1 year and 9 months ago. I have the record. Who signed the disposal order? The insurance company, after the investigation was concluded. Cormac paused. Uncle Rocco oversaw the investigation into the accident that year. He said Mrs. Camilla was exhausted, and that he would take care of everything. Alessio remained still for a very long time. Footsteps passed slowly through the hallway outside, and he knew it was Ruby going to reposition someone else in the house, because she still refused to rest, even after being injured. "How certain are you?" he asked. "I'm certain about the money. I'm not certain who was behind it." "Then we have nothing yet." "Sir, listen to me carefully, Cormac. 4 payments made during the 9 days beforehand. An abbreviated name. A bank branch near an auto repair shop. The car is gone, and I don't know who carried it out directly." He looked at the stack of papers. "If I stand up now and tell the whole family that my uncle tried to harm me, what can I actually produce? People will say the boy has only just awakened, and his mind isn't stable yet. Then my uncle will cry in front of my grandmother, and everything in this file will disappear within 3 days. Yes, sir. It isn't enough to accuse him. Then what do? We do nothing." Alessio pushed the papers back toward him. "Take these away, and don't keep them in this house. Don't mention my uncle's name on any phone call. Don't question anyone else at the harbor. If his people are listening, we need to let them hear exactly what they want to hear. What about the abbreviated name? Keep tracing it, but do it slowly. Circle around it. Don't approach it directly." "Yes, sir. There is one more thing, and it's more important than everything else we've discussed. I'm listening. Tighten security around my mother. She must have someone with her wherever she goes, even to church." He paused. "And tighten security around my wife." Cormac looked up. Alessio met his gaze, his expression unchanged. "At the restaurant, I was sitting in the farthest corner, hidden behind the screen. When someone looked in from outside, whom did they see? They saw her." "Exactly. For the past 4 months, the entire city has believed I'm still lying in bed. The only person in this house who goes outside, appears in public, and has her name on the documents is her." He continued more slowly. "If someone wants to throw this family into chaos, they won't touch a man who's confined to a bed. They'll go after the person who can still walk. I understand. The people following her must remain discreet. Don't let her know." "Why, sir?" "Because if she knows, she'll stay home, and I don't want her to have to stay home." Cormac picked up the papers and walked to the door. "Cormac." "Yes, sir." "Don't let my uncle know we're watching." On the day her stitches were due to be removed, Ruby sat on the porch with her sleeve rolled up, and Alessio lowered himself into the chair beside her. He'd stopped using his cane 2 days earlier. "What are you doing?" "I'm taking out my own stitches." "You're removing your own stitches?" "There are only 7. Dr. Whitfield is busy, and I don't want her running over here just because of a few knots." He watched her remove all 7, neatly and without making a sound. "Miss Mercer." "Yes?" "I'm going to ask you a question, and I don't want you to answer like a nurse." "Go ahead. What do you want for yourself?" Ruby's hand stopped. "No one has ever asked me that before. Someone is asking now." She placed the small scissors inside the box and closed the lid. "Do you remember the night you opened your eyes?" "I remember." "Before that night, I sat beside you and talked for 11 days straight. I talked because the silence frightened me, not because I believed you could hear me." She looked out across the yard. "Then you woke up and repeated every word I'd said back to me. Ever since that day, I haven't been able to stop thinking about the others." "What others?" "During the 7 years I worked the night shift, I pushed beds through the intensive care unit more times than I could ever count. There were rooms where no one came in for an entire year except the nurses. Their families had to work, lived far away, or had simply grown too exhausted. The only sound in those rooms was the machines." She turned toward him. "I want to create a music program for people who've been lying there that long. Real music, real people sitting in the room and singing. Songs the patients themselves used to listen to, not hospital music playing through speakers." "Would it help?" "I don't know. Dr. Whitfield says no one has proven that it does. But she also says it can't hurt." Ruby shrugged. "And even if it doesn't wake anyone up, at least there'll be a human voice in that room." Alessio sat quietly for a moment. "What do you need to get started?" Don't what?" "Don't give me money. I only gave everything back to you 2 weeks ago." "I'm not giving you money," he said. "I'm asking what you need." 3 weeks later, Ruby had a meeting at the hospital where she used to work. Alessio went with her, but he sat in the back row of the conference room and didn't say a single word for the entire 80 minutes. Ruby stood to give her presentation. and she was trembling so badly that she had to place her paper on the table to keep it from shaking. They asked about licensing, liability insurance, and who would be responsible if a patient had an unusual reaction. She answered 2 questions and stumbled on the third. "I don't know that yet," she said. "I'll look into it and come back with an answer." She remained silent for a long time on the drive home. "Why didn't you say something to help me?" "Did you want me to?" "No." "There you have it." He looked out the window. "I could make 1 phone call, and 3 days from now, you'd have a room, a license, and everything else. But then it would be my program. People would nod at you because of the Ferrante name, and the moment I was no longer there, it would fall apart. And now? Now you stumbled on 1 question. If you return next week and answer it, then it belongs to you." He turned toward her. "I've already had the lawyer prepare the registration documents. The name on every page is Ruby Mercer. Your real name." Ruby couldn't find a single word to say. "Whatever you want to study, go study it. I'll pay the tuition and consider it an advance. You can repay me later, or you don't have to. But the person who signs, the person who takes responsibility, and the person who answers their questions will be you." The car turned through the gates. "Mr. Ferrante." "Yes? Thank you. You're welcome." "No, let me finish." She turned and looked at him. "Thank you for helping without taking it away from me." Alessio didn't answer. He opened the car door and stepped out, walked around to her side, then stood waiting for her with both hands in his pockets, his eyes turned away. That night, for the first time in 4 months, Ruby lay in the room across the hall without wondering when she would have to leave that house. Priscilla Vaughn chose a day when Alessio was away, and she chose exactly the right place to wait, not the main gate, where Cormac's men were stationed. She was already sitting in the cafe across from the hospital, where Ruby often waited between her 2 shifts in the intensive care unit. She knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't try to meet Alessio, because if she met him, it would take only 1 phone call for everything to collapse within 2 days. She sought out Ruby because she'd watched her long enough to understand one thing. That young woman wouldn't remain in a place where she believed she had no right to be. "Just sit for a moment," Priscilla said when Ruby started to rise. "I'm not going to argue with you anymore. I've already lost that battle." Ruby sat back down. "Go ahead." Priscilla placed a photograph face down on the table, then turned it over. In the picture was a boy about 2 years old, sitting on a rug with a wooden block in his hand. Ruby looked at the photograph, then at Priscilla. "Whose child is he?" "Mine." Ruby said nothing. "I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after his accident. At the time, he was lying there, and the doctors said they didn't know when he would wake up, or whether he ever would. I was only 27. Priscilla spoke very slowly, and today her voice didn't carry that habit of drawing out every word as it usually did. "I left Chicago. I gave birth to him somewhere else. My family kept it hidden." She placed a sheet of paper folded into quarters on the table, opened it, and turned it toward Ruby. It was a paternity test result, printed on laboratory letterhead, complete with a case number and a signature. In the column on the left was a series of numbers. In the column on the right was the name Alessio Ferrante. "Read the last line." Ruby read it. Then she read it again. "Why are you giving this to me? You should give it to him." "I intended to. Then I reconsidered." Priscilla folded the paper again. "He's angry with my family. He's just terminated every contract between us. If I take this to him now, he'll think I've come asking for money." "And what about me?" "You're different." Priscilla looked at her. "You're the one who sat in that room for 4 months. He listens to you." Ruby didn't say a word. "I'm not asking him to take me back. I know that place isn't mine anymore. I'm asking for only one thing." She pushed the photograph toward Ruby. "The boy will start school next year. People will ask where his father is. I don't need Alessio to acknowledge me. I need him to acknowledge his son." Ruby stared at the photograph on the table for a very long time. She'd been 15 when her father died. She remembered the afternoons when she stood at the school gate watching other children run toward their fathers, and she remembered that it had taken her about 3 months to learn how to look away. What she'd never learned was how to escape the question someone asked every year, "Where is your father?" And she always had to answer with a short sentence, so they wouldn't ask anything more. "Let me think about it. I won't pressure you." Priscilla stood, leaving the photograph and the paper on the table. "Keep them. I have another copy." She reached the cafe door, then turned back. Miss Mercer. Ruby looked up. It was the first time Priscilla Vaughn had called her by her real name. I left him while he was lying there. You didn't. I know which of us is the decent person in this story. Then she left. Ruby remained in the cafe until her coffee had gone completely cold. That afternoon, she returned home, went straight upstairs to the outer room, and did everything very slowly and neatly, the way she always stripped an empty bed after a patient had been discharged. 3 shirts, including the sweater with the worn collar mended in white thread. Her old shoes. The notebook with its frayed corners. Her employee badge. On the table, she left the file for the music program, open to the page bearing her name, along with a note listing Alessio's dressing changes and medication times, written in the small, hurried handwriting of someone accustomed to taking notes in the middle of a shift. Then she picked up her bag and walked down the stairs. Alessio stood at the foot of the stairs. He'd returned 4 hours earlier than expected, and in his hand was a stack of papers. Where are you going? I asked permission to spend a few days at my mother's house. You packed everything you own, and you call that a few days. Ruby didn't answer. Put the bag down. Mr. Ferrante, put the bag down, and I'll show you this. He held out the papers. The first page was an exact copy of the test result Priscilla had given her that morning. The second was a letter bearing the letterhead of that same laboratory, dated that day and signed in fresh ink. Ruby read it, and then she had to read it a second time. The laboratory confirmed that they had no record bearing that case number. They'd stopped using that printed form 3 years ago, and the signature at the bottom belonged to someone who'd left their employment long ago. How long have you known? Cormac gave me this at 4 o'clock this afternoon. His men have been following you since this morning. He looked at her. You sat in that cafe for 2 hours and 15 minutes. You sat alone for 1 hour and 40 minutes after she left. You had someone follow me. Since that day in the street, I told them not to let you know. Why? Because if you knew, you'd stay home, and I don't want you to have to stay home. Ruby lowered the bag onto the stair. Priscilla Vaughn was summoned to the house at 7 o'clock that evening. She entered the living room and stopped when she saw Alessio sitting there and Ruby standing beside the window, still there. Mr. Ferrante, sit down. She sat. He slid the laboratory letter across the table. Priscilla read it, and she couldn't say a word. I'm not asking who the child's father is, he said. That isn't my concern, and I won't touch it. I'm asking you only one thing. Go ahead. Why didn't you bring that paper to me? Why did you bring it to her? Priscilla lowered her eyes to the table. If you won't answer, then I'll answer for you, because you knew that if you gave it to me, it would all be over in 2 days. But if you gave it to her, she would leave on her own. He rose. You sat in that cafe and told her you knew who the decent person was in this story. You were right. You even calculated correctly that a decent person would usually leave before being told to go. Mr. Ferrante, you left when I couldn't move. You came back when I became useful again. He said only that one sentence, without raising his voice. Cormac, show Miss Vaughn out. The door closed. Only 2 people remained in the living room. Miss Mercer. Yes? Next time, ask me first. Ruby sat down in the chair and began to cry, and she didn't understand why she was crying when everything had already been resolved. Alessio said nothing. He walked out. At 7:30 that evening, the smell of something burning drifted up from downstairs. Ruby went down to the kitchen and found the man whose name the entire city of Chicago had once been afraid to say aloud standing before the stove, holding a spatula and staring into a frying pan with the expression of a man who was losing. What are you doing? Cooking. Who told you to cook? No one. There were 2 plates on the table. The eggs were burned on one side and raw on the other. The potatoes had been cut into uneven pieces, some cooked and some still hard. The vegetables had turned to mush. Ruby sat down, cut off a piece, and ate it. She chewed for a very long time. Well, it's delicious. You're a terrible liar. Yes, it's awful. She put down her fork. When did you add the salt? At the beginning. When exactly was the beginning? When I turned on the stove. Dear God. Alessio sat across from her. He didn't eat. He watched her finish half the plate. Ruby. She looked up. It was the first time he'd called her by her first name, without her last name and without Miss before it. 2 months ago, I told you to divorce me. I remember. I still have that paper. It's in the drawer in my room. He spoke slowly. But I don't want another temporary marriage. Could you be more specific? I don't want to keep you here because of my mother, because of the doctor, or because you're the only person who knows how to change that dressing properly. I don't want you to stay because you feel you owe anyone anything. He placed his hand on the table. I want you to stay because you choose to stay. Ruby looked down at the eggs, burned on one side. Do you know this is the worst meal I've eaten in all my 27 years? I know, and yet I've already eaten half the plate. She picked up her fork. I suppose there must be a reason for that. Mrs. Antonia Ferrante turned 82 in June, and for the first time in 2 years, the entire family was invited home. Alessio could walk normally again, but he kept the old restrictions on outsiders in place, so everyone at the celebration bore the Ferrante name. Camilla took Ruby into the dressing room early that morning and opened 3 boxes for her. Ruby closed all 3. I'll wear my own clothes. People will stare at you. Then let them stare. She was right. The moment she entered the grand living room, the conversation faltered for a beat before rising again, though now it carried a different tone. Is that her? I heard her mother worked as a servant in someone else's home. She got into this house with forged papers, didn't you know? And Camilla still lets her stay here. Ruby heard every word. She stood beside the window with both hands folded over her stomach, and she didn't go anywhere. When it was time to present the gifts, the entire room formed a line. Someone gave Mrs. Antonia a painting. Someone else gave her an antique tea set. One uncle spent 5 minutes explaining the origins of the wooden box he'd brought, while Mrs. Antonia listened with the expression of someone who'd been hearing speeches like that for 60 years. Then it was Ruby's turn. She walked forward with nothing in her hands. The room fell silent. I couldn't bring you a gift, she said. I have an account, but I don't use it. I have my wages, but I saved that money to buy medicine for my mother. Someone in the corner let out a laugh. This is all I have. Then she sang. It was the same old song, slow and gentle, carrying all the quiet sincerity that made the entire room fall completely silent. She didn't sing loudly. She sang exactly as she'd sung in the room at the end of the hallway at 3 o'clock in the morning, when there was nothing left to do and nothing left to say. No one in the room moved. Camilla raised a hand to her mouth. Alessio stood leaning against the doorframe, and he didn't take his eyes off her for a single second. Ruby sang the song through once, then stopped. I wish you good health, ma'am. Mrs. Antonia Ferrante placed both hands on the arms of her chair and rose. The entire room rose with her. I have one question for all of you. Her voice was quiet, but no matter how large the room was, every word could be heard clearly. During the 2 years Alessio lay in that room, which one of you walked through that door? No one answered. Not one of you. You called. You sent flowers. Someone even sent a funeral wreath. I put it in storage and simply never mentioned it. She looked around the room. I know this girl entered this house under someone else's name. The entire family knows. I knew 2 months before any of you did. Then, ma'am, I haven't finished. She raised her hand. Someone forced her to sign that name. That matter will be dealt with elsewhere. But I'll tell you what I saw. She turned to Ruby. For those 2 years, the only person sitting beside my grandson's bed was his mother. In the 3rd year, this girl joined her. Only 2 people ever sat in that chair, and neither of them was born with the Ferrante name. She stepped forward and took Ruby's hand. What is your name? Ruby Mercer, ma'am. Say it loudly enough for the whole family to hear. Ruby Mercer, ma'am. From today onward, that is the name I'll call you. Anyone in this family who can't bring themselves to do the same can answer to me. She turned back toward the family. There is one more matter, and I'll settle it now. I'm giving this girl 20% of my personal shares. The room erupted. Ma'am, she hasn't what? She hasn't taken the Ferrante name? Mrs. Antonia looked directly at the person who'd spoken. The wealth in this family isn't only for those who bear its name. It's also for those who hold the house together when it's about to collapse. Grandmother. Ruby withdrew her hand. I can't accept it. Why not? Because I haven't done anything to deserve it. You sang that song for me. I'm 82 years old, and I've listened to people sing for my birthday all my life, but no one has ever made me sit so still for so long. She patted the back of Ruby's hand. Once I give something, I don't take it back. That's how this family is. In the corner of the room, Camilla turned her face away. At the door, A middle-aged man had just entered carrying a large bouquet of flowers, and he stood there, having heard every word from the beginning. "Happy birthday, sister," Rocco Ferrante said as he set the bouquet on the table. Everyone in the room turned. He walked toward the center, smiling and shaking hands with 2 or 3 people. Then he saw Alessio standing in the doorway. The smile on his face didn't disappear. It simply froze there for too long. "My nephew." He came forward with both arms open. "How long have you been awake?" 4.5 months. 4.5 months. Rocco nodded slowly. "And I didn't know. The entire city didn't know. That's right. You hid it from me. I hid it from everyone. I'm not everyone, Alessio. I'm the man who sat in your chair for 2 years to keep this family from falling apart." He turned toward the family, and his voice rose just enough. "Did all of you hear that? He's been awake for 4.5 months, and no one knew. So during those 4.5 months, who was in charge? Who signed the papers? Who answered to our partners? Uncle Rocco. This family's charter is clear. If the head of the family is unable to lead for more than 2 years and doesn't have a lawful wife, authority passes to the closest relative in the line of succession." He pointed toward the floor. "Those 2 years ended in March of last year. And as for the wedding all of you arranged to stop me, by now the whole family knows who the bride really is and what kind of papers were used." Camilla rose to her feet. "Be quiet." "Camilla, don't get angry. I'm merely reading the charter our great-grandfather wrote." Mrs. Antonia struck the tip of her cane against the floor once. "Take the children into the backyard. Right now." The family immediately led the young grandchildren out of the room, and the large doors closed behind them. Rocco watched them leave, then turned back, and he was no longer smiling. "Why did you do that? We're only having a family discussion." "Then speak." "Alessio, my nephew." He stepped back, and at that exact moment, Rocco reached out to grab Ruby's arm, trying to pull her toward him. Everyone in the room sprang to their feet. "I'm only keeping your wife with me for a moment," Rocco said, his voice still calm. "Sit down. You and I will finish discussing the charter. Let her go. Sit down, and I'll let her go. Uncle Rocco, listen to me. Sign over control of the harbor to me. Only the harbor. You can keep everything else. Sign it, and you and I will remain uncle and nephew. No one will need to say anything more. Take your hand off my wife." Ruby didn't see Cormac move. She only knew that a moment earlier, he'd been standing in the far corner of the room, more than a dozen steps away from her. A chair crashed to the floor. Then there was silence. When Ruby opened her eyes, it was already over. She was standing 2 steps away from where she'd been, and Cormac stood in front of her, shielding her with one arm still extended. 2 of his men were restraining Rocco on the other side of the long table. The bouquet lay on the floor. Alessio stepped over the fallen chairs. He didn't look at his uncle. He walked straight to Ruby, placed his hands on her shoulders, and looked into her eyes. "Did he lay a hand on you?" "No, I'm okay." "Are you sure? Did anyone hurt you?" "I'm fine, really." Cormac stopped him in time. He studied her for another moment before turning around. Rocco was breathing hard. "What are you going to do? Are you going to call the police into this house? You know our family doesn't do that." "I've already called them. They're on their way." "Alessio, just listen to one thing I have to say." Alessio stood 3 steps away from him with both hands in his pockets. "I lay in that bed for 2 years. For the past 4.5 months, I've been learning to sit up, hold a spoon, and walk again. During all that time, I didn't touch you once because I had no evidence." He paused. "Today you laid your hands on a member of my family in front of 80 witnesses. Sirens wailed beyond the gates. You've just done the difficult part for me." The police arrived at 9:20. Rocco Ferrante was escorted out of that house, while Mrs. Antonia remained in her chair with both hands resting on the top of her cane, saying nothing. Cormac turned toward Ruby and bowed his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was standing too far away. You were standing exactly where you should have been." "No, ma'am. I should have been beside you from the moment he walked through that door." He paused. "From now on, that's where I'll stand." 9 days later, the entire family was summoned home once again. This time, there were no flowers and no banquet tables. Mrs. Antonia sat at the head of the room. Camilla sat to her right. Alessio remained standing, and Cormac placed a thick file on the table. "I hadn't been able to trace the initials we found the other day," he said. 2 days ago, I finally did." He turned to the first page. Wade Kilbride, 40 years old, mechanic. 2 years ago, he worked at the repair shop our family still used. 4 payments made during the 9 days before that night all went into his account. He's confessed. Confessed to what? One of the uncles asked. He admitted that he tampered with the braking system in Mr. Alessio's car the night before Mr. Alessio left the harbor. A sharp breath sounded somewhere in the room. Camilla raised a hand to her mouth. Who hired him? Mrs. Antonia asked. The police are still working on that part, but there is something I need to present to you first, because it doesn't belong to this case file. Cormac opened another set of papers, older ones whose pages had already yellowed with age. When we investigated Kilbride's background, we discovered that he'd been investigated once before, 12 years ago. That case was closed without a conclusion. What happened? A car lost its brakes on the Western Beltway in November, 12 years ago. Mrs. Antonia placed both hands on the top of her cane. She said nothing. Ma'am, Cormac said, that was your car. The entire room fell silent. No, Mrs. Antonia shook her head. It was raining that day. They told me the road was slippery. That's what they told you, but the original technical report is still on file, and it contains a line stating that the brake fluid line showed signs of tampering. That line wasn't included in the final conclusion. Who handled that investigation? Alessio asked. Uncle Rocco. At the time, he'd just been placed in charge of the family's external affairs. No one spoke for a very long while. 12 years ago and 2 years ago, Mrs. Antonia said. The same mechanic. Yes, and the same person paid him. We believe so. The police will make the final determination. Camilla rose and walked to the window, where she stood with her back to the entire room. There is one more matter, Cormac said. I'm asking your permission to explain it in full. Go ahead. That afternoon, your car overturned in the inner lane. The person who pulled you from the car wasn't one of our people. The police report says that a passing motorist stopped to help. He turned over a page. For 12 years, our family has believed that man was the Vaughn family's private driver, and because of that, we repaid the Vaughns with our protection and most of the harbor contracts. That's right, Mrs. Antonia said. I signed the agreement myself. Ma'am, that man didn't work for the Vaughn family. Cormac placed a copy of the scene report on the table. He was a tow truck driver on his way home after finishing his shift. He stopped his truck, got out, and pulled you to safety. He didn't survive the journey to the hospital. Mrs. Antonia remained perfectly still. His name was Thomas Mercer. Ruby was standing beside the door. She heard the name, but she didn't understand. She heard it a second time inside her mind before its meaning reached her. Her hand closed around the back of a chair. My father died in a traffic accident, she said. Her voice was very quiet. They told my mother that another car struck him while he was driving. Who told your mother that? Cormac asked. Ruby couldn't answer. Harold Vaughn did, he answered for her. 2 weeks after the funeral, the Vaughn family hired your mother as their housekeeper. They paid her wages. They paid for her medicine after she suffered a stroke, and they gave you and your mother a room at the back of the house. He closed the file. During those 12 years, they received 7 major harbor contracts and the full protection of the Ferrante family because they claimed that the man who saved Mrs. Antonia belonged to them. Mrs. Antonia Ferrante rose to her feet. It was difficult for her to stand, and she had to brace both hands on the top of her cane, but no one dared to help her. Show me the photograph. Cormac handed her a copy of an old professional identification card. She took it, held it at arm's length, then brought it closer. She studied it for a very long time. This man leaned down and said something to me, she said. I've remembered those words for 12 years, he told me. Just keep breathing steadily, ma'am, and I'll get you out. She placed the photograph on the table. I tried to find him. The Vaughn family told me their man didn't want anything in return. I thought he was a decent man, so I didn't ask any further questions. She turned and looked at Ruby. You are his daughter. Ruby stood there with one hand gripping the back of the chair. Yes, ma'am. For 12 years they made you bow your head and thank the family that stole your father's honor. Mrs. Antonia spoke, and for the first time that day, her voice trembled, and I spent 12 years thanking the wrong people. The following morning, Mrs. Antonia's car stopped in front of the small room behind the Vaughn house. She allowed no one to accompany her except Alessio, Ruby, and Cormac, and she told the driver to park outside the alley so they wouldn't have to pass through the main gate. Ruby went in first. Her mother was sitting beside the window with a notebook and pen resting on her lap, just as she'd sat for the past 8 years. "Mother, someone has come to visit you." "Mrs." Antonia stepped inside, having to bend beneath the low door frame. She stopped in the middle of that room and looked at the bed, the table, and the chair, and she looked for a very long time. Then she leaned on her cane and turned toward the woman sitting by the window. "You are Mrs. Delia Mercer." Mrs. Delia nodded. "I am Antonia Ferrante." Then she did something that no one in this city had ever seen her do in all her 82 years. She released one hand from her cane and bowed her head. She bowed very low, and she remained that way. 12 years ago, your husband saved my life. I didn't know who he was. I repaid the wrong family. That family claimed the honor that belonged to him, then used it to bind you and your daughter to them for 12 years. Cormac started to step forward to help her, but Alessio raised a hand to stop him. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Mrs. Antonia said. "I'm old, and I don't have enough time left to make amends for this. I came only to tell you that from this day forward, I know his name." Mrs. Delia set down her notebook. Her hand trembled so badly that, for the first time, she made a mistake and had to tear out the page and write it again. She wrote very slowly, and Ruby knelt beside her mother. "My husband only did what he believed was right." Mrs. Antonia read those words. Then she sat in the only chair in the room, took Mrs. Delia's hand, and the two women remained that way for a very long time, without either of them saying a word. On the way home, Ruby sat gazing through the car window. 12 years, she said. For 12 years, my mother and I bowed our heads and thanked that family. Every time my mother received her wages, every time they brought her a packet of medicine, every time they reminded us who we had to thank for still having a place to live. She turned toward him. "All my life, I thought I owed them everything." "You never owed them a single cent," Alessio said. "Your father paid it all in advance." Rocco Ferrante was brought before the Council of Families at the end of that month. He sat and listened to everything, and he couldn't say a single word in his own defense. The council voted to remove him from every position, revoke his operational authority, and declare that the Ferrante family no longer had any connection to him. The complete financial records, statements, and original technical reports from both cases were turned over to the investigators the following day. Alessio didn't hold back a single page. "I'm leaving this to the law," he told his grandmother. "I lay in that bed for 2 years because someone believed our family should settle its own affairs and never take them outside." Wade Kilbride was arrested 3 days later. He confessed to everything, including what had happened 12 years earlier, and his statement matched the line that had been struck from the old final report. The Vaughn family, meanwhile, was prosecuted for what they'd done recently, not for what they'd done 12 years ago. The lawyer explained it very clearly to Ruby. There was no criminal charge that could be brought against them for claiming the honor that belonged to her father, and too much time had passed. But forging marriage documents was a crime. Forcing someone to sign them was also a crime. Ruby sat in the lawyer's office for 3 hours giving her statement, and she did it in the steady, emotionless voice of someone reading aloud from a report. Mrs. Antonia repaid the debt of 12 years in another way. That September, during the annual meeting of Chicago's harbor business community, she stood and spoke for 15 minutes. She told them about her car 12 years earlier. She spoke the name of the man who had pulled her from it. She told them what he did for a living, that he'd left behind a wife and a 15-year-old daughter, and that for 12 years, she'd repaid the wrong people because someone had stepped forward and claimed that the man belonged to them. She didn't mention the law even once. She only spoke his name. 3 weeks later, the Vaughn family no longer had a single business partner at the harbor. 6 months later, their grand house was put up for sale. Mrs. Delia Mercer had already moved out by then, and she never returned to retrieve a single thing. The Thomas Mercer Foundation was launched in November, the very month he died. Ruby sat through 3 consecutive meetings with the board, and during the final one, when they handed her the charter to sign, she read every word before setting down her pen. "I want to add one more thing at the top of the page." "Please, go ahead. Whoever receives help from this foundation owes nothing to anyone. No one is allowed to remind them of the help they received. No one is allowed to use that help to ask for anything in return, whether it's a signature, a kind word, or someone's silence." The lawyer looked up. "You want it written exactly that way?" "Yes, exactly that way." She picked up her pen. "When you help someone, don't turn that help into a chain around their neck." The foundation supported two causes. The first was providing assistance to the families of rescue workers who lost their lives in the line of duty, including tuition for their children through college, with no application required and no guarantor needed. The second was funding music programs in intensive care units, and the name attached to that program remained Ruby Mercer, exactly as it had been written on every page. The wedding took place on a May afternoon in the backyard of the house, with only 40 guests in attendance. Mrs. Delia sat in the front row beside Mrs. Antonia. Camilla stood by the aisle, and she'd been crying since before anyone began to speak. Cormac stood at the far end of the yard with his hands clasped behind his back, in the very place where he'd stood ever since that day. "Our first marriage began with fear and lies," Alessio said. "You signed a name that wasn't yours, and I lay in that room knowing nothing at all." He took her hand. "I want our real marriage to begin with the truth. Ruby Mercer, daughter of Thomas Mercer, I'm asking you to marry me." Ruby looked at him, then down toward the front row. "I entered your home because I had no other choice," she said. "I stayed because your mother called me her daughter at a time when I didn't dare speak my own name correctly." She drew a breath. "And I love you because you learned how to see me, not the housekeeper's daughter, not someone brought in to take another person's place. You see me," then she sang. It was still that same old song, slow and simple, but this time, her voice didn't tremble at the final note. It reached every corner of the yard with unconditional warmth. In the front row, Mrs. Delia Mercer raised both hands to cover her face, and she wept, while the entire yard remained silent and allowed her to cry until there were no tears left. Mrs. Antonia reached over and took her hand. That fall, Ruby returned from a medical appointment and told Alessio to sit down. "Sit down first." "What is it?" "Sit down, and then I'll tell you." He sat down. She told him. The man who'd once lain motionless for 2 years remained perfectly still for a long time, then rose, walked toward the door, turned back, and walked toward the door again. "What are you doing?" "I don't know," he said. "I truly don't know. There are debts people are forced to carry for a lifetime even though they never borrowed anything from anyone. True kindness never demands repayment, and anything that demands to be repaid isn't kindness. Some people have been gone for a very long time, yet they can still protect their children. Sometimes, the truth simply needs time to find its way home. If Ruby and Alessio's story has left something in your heart, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share this video so that every day we can listen together to more meaningful stories. How did today's story make you feel, and which detail stayed with you the most? Please leave a few words in the comments below. We truly hope to hear the thoughts that come from the deepest place in your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace each day. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next video.